Hey everyone, I am sick, so I have not shaved recently, and I'm knocking over my desk and computer. Okay. Um, I just wanted to shoot this quick intro. Today we had a talk with Wilson Chan, who is a doctor of physical therapy that is currently making a transition into tech. He's very passionate about helping people and finding new innovative ways to build technology that can continue to serve people's general well-being. So I am all for that. He recently graduated from General Assembly, and you'll hear about his experience there, what went good, what went not so well. It's a good opportunity to get some more insight into what it may be like to attend a coding boot camp. So please enjoy, and without further ado, I give you Wilson Chan. Well, thanks for coming on today and being willing to talk. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you reached out to me on LinkedIn yesterday, I think, actually. This was kind of a
Yeah, yeah, it
quick
was
meetup.
pretty impromptu. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just graduated from General Assembly pretty recently then?
Yeah, so I did General Assembly from May to mid-August.
Okay,
So I did the 3 month the software immersive. So
nice.
yeah, it was full time, essentially 9 to 5. And yeah, so I could go a little bit into my background just so that you
Sure.
kind of understand where I'm coming from. So I actually come from a healthcare background. I'm a physical therapist, and
Cool.
so I worked for about a year and a half, when I kind of had these thoughts of like, how can we work on systems or applications that could make the whole healthcare process faster or more efficient, or how can we optimize that? I think working within healthcare, especially in the United States, it's uh, one, it's pretty taxing, but also two, it's frustrating to see that insurance essentially owns everything. Uh, I didn't like the idea that wherever I worked, there had to be a quota that you had to meet, like how many, what's billable essentially, and
Right.
you had to meet a certain amount. And I didn't like that. That kind of left a weird taste in my mouth, especially since I think everyone who goes into healthcare means well. They want to go in because they want to help people, but then you realize everything's a business, which I get. Like, you know, people will have to make ends meet. People need to have some sort of revenue income to
Sure.
make their businesses survive. But I felt like that came at the cost of the clinicians, the people who actually work there, and their mental health and their yeah, it just didn't feel like the system was conducive to helping people. It just felt like it was making money.
Right.
And it felt like things were, you're essentially profiting off of people's ailments. And you're using clinicians and their desire to help people as kind of like, oh, they'll take overtime because they want to help people.
Right.
And you don't really have to like uh you don't have to like pay them for overtime, or you don't have to do X, Y, and Z for uh yeah, it was just frustrating that all we would get were like pizza parties and like, oh hey, like uh we can yeah, it just didn't feel like it was supporting the system of, yeah, it just felt like we were just taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And that was very frustrating to me. So I have a couple friends within. Oh yeah.
How long have you been practicing PT? And are you doing
Uh,
it currently?
yeah. So yeah, good question. So right now I am still practicing. I've been practicing for about a year and a half now. So honestly, it hasn't been long.
Yep.
But I think fortunately or unfortunately, I've had a couple, like, yeah, one or two bad experiences where it just felt like it it felt like too much of a business. And I worked within a clinic, I worked within hospitals, and it just felt like that was kind of the same all over.
Hmm.
And of course, like, I'm not trying to generalize, and I think that there's certain areas that you can work in that are great. Fortunately, I currently work at um, sorry, all these opinions are my own. I don't
Of
want to,
course.
yeah, yeah, I don't want to potentially say something that's like inflammatory or anything. But fortunately, I think that uh, uh, there's one company that I'm working for now. They essentially allow you to take up as many or as little patients as you like. So it's on a per diem basis. And the other job, I used to work within a hospital system, and unfortunately, I just had to let that one go. I really enjoyed that experience, but it was just they wanted me come in full time for I think like 3-4 months after the boot camp, and I just felt like I couldn't balance that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of prevalent all over, just speaking with like other therapists, and they're all just saying like, yeah, I have to meet certain quotas as well. And I'm not saying that I think I also want to say that, just even though I've been there for a year and a half, I also how should I word this? I think certainly there are aspects that I could have worked better on in terms of like being more efficient as a physical therapist.
Hmm.
But sometimes I felt like I had to compromise quality of care.
Yeah.
Like that, I think that's hard as a clinician. Like you want to be efficient, you want to see more people so you can hypothetically help more people, but then
Right.
how can you spend the necessary time to be like, okay, this person's needs are being met? And I
Yeah.
think as like an early clinician, that was something I struggled with.
Are you familiar with
you know,
Aaron Horschig?
no.
He's a physical therapist, and he wrote a book called Rebuilding Milo, which is about I believe, the Greek character who, as a young boy, had a cow that he would pick up every day, and
Uh-huh.
as the cow grew, he also grew, and he grew to like compensate for that, and that's like the archetype of like bodybuilding in general. And so
Oh, cool.
he works a lot with bodybuilders and strength trainers and stuff, and it's like. He has a different perspective that I've come across with. I don't have a ton of experience in PT, but a lot of his methodology is about becoming strong in the way that your body is supposed to, essentially. So a lot of his PT methodology is about rebalancing and reprioritizing how you actually balance how the body is adapting as time goes by, rather than like looking straight at an ailment and using specific methods to like maybe temporarily relieve the pain or whatever that may be going on. I don't think that it seems to me like what you're trying to get at is you're not lazy, which is clear. I mean, to go through school and become a PT is very intense. To go through a full-time boot camp experience is extremely intense. I don't think your work ethic is in question here. The question is primarily, from the way that I hear you framing it, is what kind of opportunity cost are we getting from churning patients versus getting consistently high quality outcomes for less people? And I think that's a really interesting question. And that kind of harkens back to you wondering about the inefficiencies within the medical industry in general, as it regards in regards to what kind of software it's using. So no, I think I think that these are all valid concerns and really good questions worth asking. So, it's so funny because I've talked to two people that come from the medical field, yourself and Benjamin Van Wyn, who was recently in a
Hmm.
podcast of mine. And he, he is also Asian, and he has the exact same haircut as you, which is just
Oh,
funny. I
nice.
just think it's funny that
Yeah.
two people from the same field who who have the
Yeah, it's
same
it's
haircut.
in. It's in, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, that's cool, man. That's a cool background. Do you have a PhD, or did you get your master's, or what's your?
Uh yeah, so now physical therapy degrees are like DPT, so Doctorate of Physical Therapy.
Okay.
Um it was like a 3.5 year program
Oh,
after grad
nice.
school.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That is quite the journey to, get a year in and realize it's not for you
it,
necessarily.
yeah, I think it was I like, don't get me wrong, I love what I do. I love like interacting with people so intimately.
Yeah.
Especially when you can like go into someone's like home and they're like saying like, oh, this is what bothers me. These
Right.
are the things that I'm struggling to do. And to empower patients in that way, I think truly amazing.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you're interacting with people so intimately, and uh, one of the things I was actually like worried about was going into software. Would I lose that, like, you know, patient clinician interaction? Like, will I, like, if you're working on a scale of, you know, thousands of people, like, you inherently lose that sense of like connection uh with your, like, I guess, client base.
Right.
And that was something I was, you know, thinking about, like, oh, like, I don't want to lose that. So uh I do have the intentions of keeping my degree so that I could still maybe see, like, you know, 1 or 2 patients a week, just because I truly enjoy that work.
Yeah, I don't know any of the legal implications of this, but I don't see why you couldn't see several patients a week in, say, a private practice. I don't know what the overhead is for something like that.
Mhm.
But I don't see why you couldn't still help people like that while you're doing what you do. And I also don't see why you couldn't, if you wanted to, develop software that would be relevant to your particular field, either to help out hospitals or larger institutions, or to help people on the individual, like go B2C essentially, and help individuals who are going through pain or ailments that they need resolved. I mean, I can think of quite a few applications that you could
Mhm.
build, web or mobile, that would be super helpful for that kind of thing. And for me, all of my experience basically with BTs is through Aaron Horschig, so I'll mention him again. But like his methodologies, you could totally put onto, in terms of like screening for pain. He has a lot of like screening methodologies that you can use as
Mhm.
an individual. So I could totally see somebody building an app for him that would be relevant
Mhm.
to targeting and screening the particular ailment that you're going through, and then walking through a specific plan relevant to whatever you're experiencing. So, no, I think that's awesome. I hear you with the tangibility of things. I come from not as I'm not formally educated, but I come from a service background. So I've owned a window cleaning business, and like a services business for the last uh, half a decade, basically. And there's so much tangibility in that. You know, I know it sounds very simple, but it's like you look at a window, it's dirty, you clean it, it's done, and it looks nice. And it's like, look, I did this thing. Software isn't like that right away. It takes a while for you
Yeah.
to get to a point where it's like, I want to build this thing from this wireframe, and then you can actually build it and it actually looks reasonable, and not like it was built in the 1980s,
Yeah.
or I guess mid 90s,
Yeah.
is when the internet was a thing. So yeah, and once again with the, like, with helping people, um you know, I can't say I was like changing people's lives necessarily by cleaning their windows, but it's like they called me, they needed something, and you provided that, you helped them get that done. That's not as immediately tangible in software all the time, but I think aligning your goals in software with something like helping people get out of physical pain is a really noble enterprise, and has that tangibility and like existential fulfillment. You can get that similar fulfillment from pursuing something like that. So no, I think these are all great things. So yeah, good for you, man.
Really, really talking me up, man. Thanks. What was it?
How
Yeah,
was
thank you. Appreciate it.
how was General Assembly? Because despite what my viewers might think, you know, I have some things to say about my experience.
Mhm.
I don't think boot camps are evil. I think that you can get good results out of them. I think, in fact, probably a relative majority of people get what they pay for if they're willing to enter it with the right mindset and put the time aside to actually study and work. So, um, yeah, just so my viewers know, I'm not all against it despite my experience. I'm actually for it in a lot of circumstances. So in any case, I'd like to hear how, just generally, how was it? I guess first off, did you have any programming experience going into it? Did you self-teach it all beforehand, or did you just dive in without preparing a ton?
So yeah, I really didn't have any software background. I would say I was pretty familiar with computers. Like I've worked with like uh I guess like different programs when I was I'm just very comfortable with computers.
Mhm.
I think that is yeah, so yeah, I'm just very comfortable with computers, but I haven't formally like uh done like a Udemy course,
Mhm.
or I know that there's free code camp. I haven't gone through any of them specifically.
Okay.
Maybe like one or two lessons, and then after that, I was like, okay, like this seems fun. This seems cool.
Hmm.
And then I decided to just just take the dive after that.
Cool.
I did. That was an avenue that I wanted to take, self-studying, but I think unfortunately, self-studying I think requires a very specific mentality, and
Yeah.
also like I don't want to say like grit in a way. Like you just have to be very dedicated to like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to achieve this by the end of the week. And I think that was very hard to stay with, I think, when you're self-studying.
Yeah.
But going back, I think I did want to try self-studying just because it's a much more affordable option. I've
Yeah.
heard that it was possible. And I was like, oh, my dad's into programming. I have a bunch of friends. I have so much support. But at the end of the day, it's like, do you yourself have the discipline to like sit down and accomplish these goals? And I think
Right.
that was, uh, I kept saying to myself, oh, I'm gonna, pick up JavaScript. I'm gonna learn, HTML, CSS. But weeks would go by where I would just be kind of like looking tutorial after tutorial, but without actually doing anything practically, like
Yeah.
actually coding.
Yeah.
And I think that was where I was like, okay, like let's not let words be words. Let's do something. And so
Yeah.
that's when I decided to take the jump.
Cool.
Yeah.
So just in general, like how was the experience? You did the
Mm.
3-month course, which I can't really speak to. I'd like to hear about the intensity of that. Did you fall behind during that time? Just in general, how was that experience?
Yeah, so I think the experience was I feel like it was very mixed. I think it fortunately wasn't like the scenario where we had signed an NDA and say like, oh, we can't talk about it.
Sure.
It wasn't like our TAs and our lead was very, very helpful.
Mhm.
And I think in the beginning they also set like I also feel a little bit mixed about this too, but they kind of set the expectation of like, okay, before you come to us, you should try your best with like, using all your resources, Stack Overflow, Google, ChatGPT. And if you can't come to an answer there, then you can come to us.
Mhm.
Which I think it's good because that's essentially what a software engineer would have to do when you work on your own. But at the same time, it felt like at the like I by the end of my boot camp, I feel like I didn't really utilize my TAs as well as I could have,
Mm.
because I think they have experience that I could have really learned a lot from. But I think just having ChatGPT, I think like has completely changed the field of like programming and even learning programming. So I think for all the questions that I had about coding, I would just naturally just gravitate towards ChatGPT and just be like, oh, what's the use case for this? Give me example code for what this would look like, and what's wrong with my code, and how can we make it more efficient,
Right.
and like stuff like that. I think it was overall good because the bootcamp was overall good because it forced me to kind of sit down. Okay, 9 to 5. This is what you're going to do. These are what it gave me, like a schedule of what to do,
Mm.
what to accomplish by the end of the day. Now, is that something that I could have accomplished on my own? Looking back, I want to say yes, but also no, because that's not something I actually did when I did give myself that time.
Right.
So I feel like at the end of the day, you're really just paying for motivation,
Yeah.
which kind of sucks to say that. Um, I don't want to say that it wasn't worth it, because now coming out of the boot camp, I kind of have the sense of like, oh, I can do this on my own. I know
Mhm.
what I can, or I know what I have to do for me to, accomplish X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And like, hey, I don't get it now, but I will get it later. Type
Yeah.
type of mentality.
Yeah, I mean that's like that specifically is what Benji said in our last call together is like, one of the upsides of this whole thing falling apart and me not having to pay full price for the boot camp itself is that the inevitable just happened sooner. And the inevitable is that eventually you'll be mostly alone with figuring these things out, whether it's after boot camp and getting into that job, or if you're fortunate to get the position early, once you're in the job itself. It's like most of the learning from about how to solve a specific problem is going to be on you. You can have some oversight. You will have some oversight and help from your managers in general, but it's not their job to teach you how to code. The help from them that you should expect should be not minimal, but also not fully comprehensive, as if you had a full-time mentor. So that is the inevitable eventuality of becoming a programmer. And so the question about whether you self-teach or go to boot camp and try to get a job after that, or if you get a job early on, eventually you come to that reality. So I don't think there's a right way to get to that eventuality, but it does happen to everybody, at some point or another. So I do think that's the reality that everyone going to a coding boot camp eventually comes across. So yeah. Would you say that first off, I'm just curious, do you know what the initial cohort size was at GA, and then roughly how many of them graduated?
I would say I think it was around mid-20s about,
Okay.
but I think by the end of it we were down to 13 or so. It was actually a lot of our cohort actually dropped out.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So almost a
yeah,
50% dropout rate.
yeah, yeah. Don't quote me on. I think it was quite a substantial dropout though.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and I think speaking with some of my cohort, I was able to make some friends. They're they're like pretty honest. They were like, yeah, I don't know if I'm really enjoying this experience by the end of it. And it's already like past the refund time, and
Yeah.
um like I feel like it was going pretty strong until I would say like three-quarters of it,
Okay.
till the end, where I just felt like, okay, a lot of this is a little overwhelming. This is I feel like this is where again I feel mixed as well. I
Hmm.
feel like it's the limitations of boot camps where uh I felt like I was just brute forcing my way of like, this is how you do things, and I wasn't learning.
Yeah. Right.
Where it was like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, this is the way things are done. And I think I think listening to someone else on YouTube where they were saying how learning computer science now, things are just so far abstracted that uh you don't really know why. Well, I don't think that this should be the case, but like doing a boot camp, you don't quite know why you're doing what you're doing. You just know that it works this way.
Right.
I'm not sure if you kind of experienced that during your time at GA, but I feel like what I wished for was if they actually taught us like why this is important or why this works. Because now I'm just kind of like, I feel like in order for you to grow as a software engineer, you kind of have to build off of uh, lower level things so that you
Yeah.
can be like, okay, this is there because this was inefficient, and then now we have a new framework. We have a new framework for that because it solves for this problem. Um, and I just felt like we just like went from we're just kind of building scaffolding off of nothing, off of thin air in a way.
Right. Right.
Right. So
Yeah,
I think
this
that
is
that
how,
was.
yeah, this is how it is. This is specifically how you do this thing, and it works, but
Mm,
you don't necessarily know why. I would say I had a similar, I would say the circumstances were similar for me as well. I did the part-time cohort. So I mean the pace was half of what you were going through. Personally, I don't know if I even have the aptitude or ability to go through a 3-month cohort like you did. I might have been part of that 50% that ended up dropping given the pace of things. I yeah, I I basically agree with everything you just said. I think, you know, the cohort dissolved just after halfway through, basically for me. And I felt similar, I had spent a reasonable amount of time self-studying beforehand. I had learned the basics of HTML, JavaScript, and JS. But still, by the time we got to the back half, like learning the back end Node and Express and MongoDB, it did start to feel like, okay, this is starting to become a lot. I can definitely do this, but yeah, there might not be room to really truly understand that why while we're in this process, because just keeping up with the what is quite intensive. So moving on and going to the why of things is yeah, is maybe a bit much to ask in this particular situation. And I don't really know what the remedy for that is. I think something that is self-paced could probably be the case with like consistent mentorship. But yeah, I don't think there's a perfect answer in the market for that particular problem with coding boot camps.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if you've heard of CS50. I think that's a pretty like basic, is very beginner level, and I think it's the professor who teaches that course is great at explaining things,
Yeah,
and actually makes like, oh, this is why this is important, or
right.
this is why this could lead to X, Y, and Z. And I think that was I was just going through it just in my free time after the boot camp, just to be like, I just felt like I wanted that type of information.
Yeah,
Um, so I think that was helpful in that sense. But I also hear like you can go too far down the rabbit hole of that uh, type of information where practically what does it look like? And I think boot camps are good at teaching like the practical things, like
yeah,
making a website, doing a MERN stack, like actually coding for a web app. And I think
right.
I was speaking with another software engineer 2 days ago, and he was just saying like, yeah, you're coming out of a boot camp, and I might even say that you have more coding experience than new grads, because not all new grads are actually coding. They are learning the concepts, and they're learning about like the foundations of why
Right,
those things are the way they are, but they're not actually coding for what it looks like in a full stacked environment.
right.
Um, so I think I do see the benefit of. I think there needs to be like a fine balance of both. I think at the end of the day is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, boot camp kind of errs on the side of like pure practicality.
Mhm.
Not only, but there's only so much time to go into the low
Yeah.
level things that you're going to get out of like a CS50 kind of experience. So
Mhm.
yeah, very cool. Um, okay, so yeah, that's interesting about a 50% dropout rate. You know, when I talked to my admissions person at the very beginning of this whole experience, she claimed to expect about a 20% dropout rate over the course of the cohort. I think that was probably the case and a reasonable I don't think she was lying to me, but I think that was probably a reasonable expectation maybe 6 to 9 months ago. And perhaps things have changed a little bit since then. Did you guys do any? I've heard some people have reached out to me about GA doing video lectures. Did you have any of that, or was it all live instruction?
Yeah. So how ours was arranged, we did all asynchronous. So it was
Mm,
all just watching videos, and so I think that was a bit of a change for a lot of people. I think they adopted that type of style because of COVID. Um,
yeah,
I'm not sure if that was the. I'm not sure if they did do like live classes um, prior. I'm based in New York City, and I think that they used to have like live classes based in New York City.
yeah,
But I think uh, so. During COVID, I was actually in grad school, and we actually had to do some asynchronous type of learning. And so that format wasn't unfamiliar to me. So I think I kind of had that going for me where, okay, like I'm going to have to be sitting in front of my computer from 9 to 5, which is an exhausting experience.
yeah,
So I think going into the boot camp, I kind of had this mentality of like, okay, like get ready for what grad school looked like. And so I was like, okay, like mentally I was prepared for that. And I think uh unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, just going straight into that it's a lot. Like I admit, it was like it's not for everyone.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people in my cohort, they kind of felt like that cheapened the experience, where it's just like, what's the difference between me and learning on my own on YouTube videos, right?
right.
And that, like, to that, I'd say like absolutely, I totally agree. Um, and so again, I get what you're paying for is uh the experience of the TAs and the lead instructor, but when they're kind of like discouraging, or not discouraging, but when they're trying to direct you into looking into your own avenues of like how to do things, of using Google, ChatGPT, uh it did feel like what am I really paying for, right?
Right.
That kind of experience. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm largely of the belief that I don't know where that comes from, why they're doing asynchronous. That wasn't the case with my cohort, and it's interesting because I did it. Sorry, when did you graduate again?
This was, I graduated mid-August, so like August
Okay.
6th,
Yeah, so
15th,
you
yeah.
were just behind like the cohort that I signed up for essentially, and it was still all live lectures. Like there was a
Mhm.
live teacher for every lecture, and I don't know, in my opinion that's a superior approach, because you
Mhm.
can, stop the lecture and ask a question or like circle back and reiterate. I'm curious where like what the what the argument GA has for going to video lectures is. I don't know if they're short staffed or if they're unapologetically trying to cut costs, or what. I don't know why they've taken that approach, but I don't know. I didn't experience it, so I can't say this from the point of view of somebody who experienced it, but it does seem to kind of cheapen the experience for me, especially if you're paying full retail price for something that
Yeah.
was just a year ago exclusively live lectures. I don't get how that's of equivalent value.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That was like the same argument that we had throughout grad school too, because grad school, unfortunately, that was the case. Like we had to shift over to uh online lectures because of COVID. And
yeah,
then now that, I don't want to say like COVID's gone or anything, but I think uh the yeah, I think with just with everything changing with COVID now, I think the relationship is different. And now I feel like people are still keeping the same uh things because they realize it's like cost saving or
right,
more efficient in a certain way.
yeah,
I do want to say that when we did do the asynchronous learning, we would watch the videos on our own, and if we had questions, we can drop out of. So we would also have like Zoom that was going on in the background too. So if you did have a question, you could go into a breakout room with one of the TAs, and they could specifically do a one-on-one, like, oh hey, if you have any questions, you can ask us about this, and then we can explain it to you. So I think that
okay,
that was pretty helpful, so that they called it asynchronous because again, everyone has different learning style or learning speeds.
sure,
So you know uh, you could be watching a video, and if someone was stuck on one concept, they could drop out, ask a question, and then go back into learning that.
yeah,
So I do see how that was helpful. um Again, I think it's it's a mixed relationship where I see the use cases and I do see the benefits of it, but at the same time, it does feel like it cheapened the experience of it as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of an open like Q&A sessions at the end of these asynchronous lectures per chance? Like in addition to being able to hop out and talk to a TA?
Yeah. So
Cool.
like anytime you did have like a question, they would always be like available, and I think
Okay.
uh that was honestly, I would say like the TAs that I had were great. The lead was great. They were very open and willing to help you. Which I think it's like unfair for you to kind of like get the like you know opposite spectrum of like TAs that weren't even present, right?
Sure.
And yeah, I think that that's like very very frustrating that there isn't like this universal kind of like experience
Right. Right.
across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even when I find myself like I'm thinking right now as we talk about the video I just posted this morning that you were watching before our
Mhm.
talk, it's about like red flags and coding boot camps in general. And like one of the things I mention is whether or not there's availability to access people like instructors within the cohort while the lectures are are going on. And I think it's funny because I think about the experience that I had and don't necessarily account for the potential changes in the structure sometimes, because it's like in your experience you couldn't pause the lecture necessarily and like go back and have some reiteration, and by the time you've hopped into a room with a TA and gotten that clarification, um were you able to pause these lectures as you go, or was it an okay, nice, okay, so you sort
Mhm.
of have that. It's not live lectures, but you did have the ability to um yeah, pause and get some clarification, so that's not as bad as it could be, I suppose. So um, out of the people that dropped, I'm asking this question to gauge the accountability that students were held to. Out of the people that dropped, would you say any of them like were asked or excused from the cohort, essentially because they were falling behind and weren't meeting expectations, or would you say that people that dropped were primarily dropping of their own prerogative? Basically, were the teachers like, did you perceive the teachers as holding students accountable for actually learning and kind of mastering the material as you go through it, or were people dropping because they were frustrated or falling behind and weren't being helped? Would you say?
That I really don't know. I wasn't uh I wasn't able to get like that type of information from. I don't think that there were enough opportunities for me to get to know enough of the cohort
Sure.
who dropped to actually kind of hear their side of things.
Okay.
Um,
When
yeah.
you submitted like assessments or projects and stuff, was the feedback quick, insightful, and like did it hold you accountable to what you were doing, or did you find the feedback to be minimal?
I would say the feedback was relatively minimal. Uh, I think it was just kind of like if you did have any question about why things didn't work, or uh, I think that they put a lot of the expectation on you to come up with those like problems, or that like if you did have any issues, for you yourself to like go up and say like, hey, I have an issue with X, Y, and Z, and I don't know like what's going on with it.
Sure.
I Yeah, I do want to say it was relatively minimal, uh, because I think I have to admit I didn't go and ask a lot of questions on my own, because I felt like I had a lot of the resources online.
Yeah.
Um, but I do feel like for other people, from what I saw, it did feel like that they had the support of the TAs to kind of like help them through things.
Right. Okay.
I know that for some people as well, they were falling behind, but the TAs and the lead were pretty understanding of like, oh, hey, like this is where you're coming from, like totally understand. There's like you have to submit uh assignments on given due days, but I think that they were pretty flexible with it given the certain like context that they were in.
Got it.
Um, so
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
I think
fortunately,
boot
like
camps
people
are
were.
going to be a little bit more liberal on things like that, especially now
Mhm,
when there's going to be less people signing up, given the condition of the market currently. Um,
mhm,
and frankly, I unfortunately, I think it's against boot camp's best interests to actually make sure that students fully grasp and are mastering the material as they go. It's a bonus if they do, but for the student, but yeah, I don't think the financial incentives line up with holding students accountable, unfortunately, right now in
mhm,
the standard boot camp model. So, yeah, I don't know what the solution is to that. I think it probably has something to do with like self-paced or a subscription-based boot camp, because the skin in the game on the side of the student is consistent throughout the length of the cohort. It's not like completely do or die for the student. And if the student is falling behind and isn't getting the help that they need, then the cohort or the boot camp risks losing that student and the recurring revenue coming from that student. So it kind of holds both parties a little bit more accountable. But again, I don't know. That's not the full
mhm.
solution, but I think it might be part of um, a multifaceted solution to the boot camp problem that we kind of see right now. So what What do you have to say about career services? Have you utilized that at all? How's your relationship with your advisor? What's going on that front?
Yeah, so
Because
uh
this is, I mean, to be clear, this is like the reason that a lot of people join a boot camp in the first place. Is like, look, all
mhm,
of these assumptions, I already know this. I could find the
mhm,
material online. I'm willing to
yeah.
hold myself accountable or hire somebody for cheaper than the cost of a boot camp to hold me accountable.
Mhm.
And but the career services are allegedly, quite good and will highly increase my chance of getting into a position. Do you find that to be the case?
Um I want I think it's I want to say yes and no for this circumstance as well. Or at least for my circumstances. Um I know that their intent is to have someone find any job, any sort of like position, whether it be like entry level or um but I think for me, like I want to be pretty specific with where I apply to. So I want to be more focused on health and fitness, that niche sector within software engineering. But what I think I don't quite appreciate, and I'll actually be speaking with the advisor next week about it, is that they have this expectation where you have to apply to like uh, 10 jobs a week. And I think that that's a little, I feel like it's a little, I don't want to be spending my time on uh, applying to jobs that I don't have any interest in.
Right.
Um, I think they're worried about metrics, which I totally understand.
Yeah.
Um, while for me, I think fortunately I'm in a position where I want to be very selective with what job I apply for, and I feel like that they're not quite receptive to that because
Sure.
again they have metrics to keep up. Um, and so I do feel like yes, they do have like certain group chats where they're like, oh hey, there's these we're going through this problem set, or we're going there's this like internship that's coming up. I think it does give you opportunity for that, but I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary for you
Right.
to do those things.
Yeah.
Um, I do feel like that they, if you're coming from uh, if you're coming from a place where you don't have any background in connecting with other people or resume building or interview prep, I think that that could be helpful with, but I don't feel like that's absolutely necessary, because I think that you can always connect with people on your own through LinkedIn and just be like, hey, like, do you mind if we kind of do like a mock interview? I think that that's something that uh, people have the opportunity to do on their own.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's absolutely necessary for you to be like, okay, this is, yeah, I don't think that it was necessarily super helpful in my case.
Yeah. Totally. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think your story and your circumstances kind of resonate with kind of the market in general right now. It's like boot camps may be in certain ways deteriorating in quality in terms of what they actually deliver to the students. And so the question kind of becomes like, I mean, it's the same as it was before, but it's like, do I join a coding boot camp and risk a large amount of capital on this experience?
Mhm.
Do I continue to go the self-taught route and maybe hire somebody who can keep me relatively accountable, or who I can meet up with every week, or just do it alone? Or do I go back to college and yeah, risk learning kind of the low level stuff that will maybe sustain a longer or more high quality career or a better beginning at the expense of some of the more practical skills? Yeah, it's a hard question, and I don't think that I don't think there's a sufficient market fit to really like give an answer to that question yet. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I definitely there's a hole in the educational space, and
Mhm.
I think if somebody was able to put a lever in that hole and crank it open, a ton of cash would flow out of it in
Yeah.
the direction of that person. So, yeah, it's something I've been trying to investigate a little bit more to figure out what that answer is. I'm not in a position to teach people necessarily, but yeah, I think that there is definitely a business waiting to happen, a whole basically a whole new sub industry, and what that needs to look like is still kind of yeah, still abstract. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool, man.
I do recall speaking with someone else, and they came out of Codesmith, I believe.
Okay.
And I know that for their boot camp, they were completely like uh they how they approached getting a software engineering job was completely different. So their boot camp was, I think, again, I'm speaking from anecdotal
Sure.
uh, evidence, so it might not be true. So, but I do feel like how they arranged it was through data structures and algorithms focus. So it was less focused on building projects. It was more focused on um, acing the interview,
Got it. Okay.
which I think to that, I also get their approach because with any company that you go to, there's always going to be, 3 to 6 months of you actually just learning their code base and
Yeah.
learning like what they do. So us learning like, full stack development, how much of that really does carry over into like a full-fledged application,
Right.
right? So their approach was, I think, doing like lead code style questions every day. And so I think that that's something I wish I kind of had throughout GA, but I think that approach is valid up to a certain point. Is again like where's that education going towards? Are we going towards just like solving problem sets, or are we actually like understanding the full picture of like how things like blend together to make a
Yeah.
program, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of goes to show that like the application process to like software engineering jobs is kind of like broken. Like
Yeah.
why is the interview just like lead code style questions where once you actually do get the job, your job is to, I don't know, like center a div, like change the color of this button,
Right.
right? And uh, I
Yeah,
think
you're not
it
really
again,
yeah. You're
yeah,
not really
you're
worried
not.
about space and time complexity when you're centering a div.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, yeah, and so I think I think there's a use case for like that sort of like lead code style question because
Of course.
you have to worry about scale, but uh for the most part, like you're not going to be using like hash maps every single day or like
Right.
binary trees, whatever. Like you're not going to be doing those things on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
But
and I mean, I
yeah,
also, yeah, it's, yeah, basically, I mean, what you're saying is learning anything, especially software engineering, in a short amount of time, there's going to be major trade-offs with your
mhm,
approach, essentially.
yeah,
Um,
right, right,
even with like learning to build projects from scratch, it's like, especially as a junior, you're not going to be building a ton of projects from scratch all the time. You may be, but I think generally, what you're doing as a junior is learning how to navigate a code base and track down relatively simple bugs by going through a large array of different code files and finding the source of those particular problems. I'm working right now just as a WordPress developer, and that is certainly the case for me. I mean, most simple template issues do not have the most simple solution and require quite a bit of digging through a large array of PHP files just to find where the source of a bug comes from or where a potential fix comes from. And it's not always intuitive. Um, but I mean, as far as like my experience so far, you know, we have some projects coming up where I'm going to be not in charge, but largely responsible for the development of an entire site theme, for example. But that's, I'm 5 months in now, and up until now, it's been largely training and then figuring out these simple bugs by digging through thousands of lines of dispersed code to find out why the to figure out how to remove the terms and conditions from a footer. And that, yeah, it's just funny because the nature of the work, in my experience, is nothing like the workflow of creating a project from start to finish, at least not in the first, like in the infancy of your career. So even within like taking the approach of like, okay, I'm just going to focus full-fledged on projects, there's trade-offs just within that, where it's like you're not going to get a junior position, and you're probably not going to get a junior position and be responsible for building projects from the ground up on day one. At least you better hope not, because you're going to come across like quite a few issues with doing that from a technical standpoint. So, and the same thing goes for like, oh, I'm going to focus full-fledged on DSA, to the cost of not having any high quality projects. And yeah, it's just trade-offs all the way down, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, you do have to figure out like what trade-offs am I willing to make up front, and like take responsibility for that, instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to fill in the blank boot camp and they're going to resolve all these deficiencies that I have. That's not the case. Chris Sean, the popular tech YouTuber, a couple of years ago made a video. I know he doesn't feel this way anymore, but he got into tech after learning a little bit of like HTML and CSS for a few months. And it's like, we're not in that market anymore. It's much more nuanced to get into a junior position now. So
Hmm.
you have to account for that with your strategy. So realize that there's trade-offs all the way down, essentially, and take accountability for your approach, and don't yeah, don't outsource your accountability for choosing the right approach to spending a ton of money on a boot camp that claims that they have the answers to things. So
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One interesting thing that my friend also added was to not just apply to junior level, even though you're just out of boot camp,
Yeah.
is to apply to even those mid level jobs too. Just because it's so saturated within the junior entry level positions now, because
Mhm.
you're competing against new grads, boot camp grads, and maybe even just taking the leap to apply to mid level. Yeah, so I think coming from Codesmith, they were encouraging them to apply to mid level, acing the interview, because all they did was lead style code questions,
Yeah.
um, and then learning how to code during the 3 to 6 months of training. Then
Right.
because everyone's code base is going to be different, so there's always going to be learning. Yeah, in that case, but yeah, what was, I guess, like really encouraging was to, or what was insightful was, yeah, you maybe that's a different avenue that people can take.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean that, and learn about the hidden job market, I would say, as well.
Hmm.
There's a ton of jobs out there that aren't posted on LinkedIn or Indeed. And by the time a job is on LinkedIn or Indeed, a company is spending money to have it put there, which means that they've probably done their due diligence from like internally looking for people who are in different roles that want to get into engineering, and they couldn't find the person. And then they looked internally to referrals and tried to go that route, and they didn't find that person. So now they're spending money on a job board to try to get that role fulfilled. And it's like, you can get
Hmm.
into that position if you reach out to the right person at the right time, and they like you, they like your demeanor. I can attribute most of the credit for getting my first position with the extremely minimal experience that I had was just in my ability and willingness to show my face, and say hello, like literally say hello and look at the camera and say, this is who I am, this is where I'm coming from, and this is why I can help you. I can attribute probably 70% of the reason why I got that job to that specific approach. So yeah, know that it's not all skill, and that you can absolutely and must in this environment network your way into that first position. So yeah, sweet, man. Well, this was a killer talk, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else, if there's anything else you'd like to say about your experience at GA, or please plug where people can find you. The floor
Yeah,
is
yeah,
yours, man.
absolutely. Um, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I took from GA was, the lead was just saying how it's not a question of if but when. So I think that after that, I I feel like that mentality change of, okay, like I'm going to get this, maybe not today, but it's going to happen, right? So I think that having that sort of mentality going into this complete new career is yeah, I think just mentality in general is super important, because I think it's so discouraging to hear people ghosting you on job boards, or just having rejections on rejections. It's difficult, but I think just reminding yourself that it's not a matter of if, but when is this going to happen. um, so yeah, I'd say yeah, keep it up. It's hard. It's hard. But yeah, no, if you want to chat more, feel free to just shoot me a message over LinkedIn. And I would love to, uh, chat more maybe a year down the road, just to see what our thoughts are about the whole market. And hopefully we're in engineering roles then,
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, man. Okay, well, we'll wrap up this recording and we'll chat for another minute or two after. But where can
Mhm.
people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so people can find me on LinkedIn. I can send you my LinkedIn URL, and I guess you post it up there. But yeah, people can connect with me on LinkedIn, and if they're interested, I would love to chat, because I think that going through the bootcamp experience is something that a lot of people are interested in, and I would love to just like help someone else out, just because it's a lot. It's very overwhelming, and
Yeah,
that's something I wish I had as well.
sweet. Right on, Wilson. Thanks for coming on today, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course.